You ever get that feeling someone's watching you, but no one's there? One summer night, that feeling was real, and what they saw in the dark can't be explained. 3 people, 3 horrifying nights, and every word you're about to hear actually happened. My name's Brian, and this happened 3 years ago during what was supposed to be a relaxing summer weekend. I was 22 at the time, fresh out of college, and working a temp job I hated in downtown Denver. A friend of mine, Mark, invited a few of us out to his family's lake house for a weekend escape. I remember being so pumped just to get out of the city. No deadlines, no traffic, just cold beers, a boat, and long nights by the water. The lake house was about 2 hours away, tucked up near a spot called Twin Pines Lake. It's one of those areas that doesn't show up well on GPS unless you know exactly where to zoom in. No major highways, barely any cell reception, and 0 streetlights. Mark's family owned a small piece of land there, with a house that hadn't been updated since the 80s. The porch creaked with every step, and the place always smelled faintly like mildew, but I loved it. There were 4 of us that weekend: me, Mark, his cousin Jordan, and our friend Will. All of us had been tight since high school. We showed up late Friday afternoon, tossed our bags inside, and immediately cracked open drinks on the dock. The lake was still, not a ripple in sight, and the air was thick and warm in that way summer always feels near the water. It was perfect. That first night, we stayed up drinking and talking about all the dumb stuff we'd done as teenagers. You know, that kind of nostalgia that only shows up when you're drunk and somewhere remote. We had a small campfire going a few feet from the water. Around midnight, Mark pulled out this cheap Bluetooth speaker and started playing music, but the signal kept cutting in and out. He kept walking closer to the water, trying to get it to sync, but gave up when it buzzed and made this high-pitched whine. We all laughed it off and turned it off. I don't know what it was exactly, but after that moment, the whole energy shifted, like someone flipped a switch on the atmosphere. At first, I thought it was just the drinks getting to me, but everything got quiet, like too quiet. The normal buzz of crickets and frogs just sort of faded. It's not something you notice until it's completely gone. That natural white noise was just missing. Will was the first to say something. He was squinting toward the far side of the lake, across the black glassy surface. "Anyone else see that?" he said. We all turned, nothing, but he insisted. "I swear I saw a light, like a flicker, right out there." We figured it was another house, but Mark shook his head. "No one's out there. Only our place and the old boarded-up shack across the lake. The Holmans used to own it, but abandoned it back in the 90s. No one's touched it since." I remember asking why it was abandoned, and Mark just said something vague about bad luck and how the place had a weird rep with the locals. He never explained further, and honestly, I didn't push him. He wasn't the kind of guy to believe in ghost stories or superstition. A little before 2 a.m., we finally started winding down. The others went inside, but I stayed back to finish my drink. That's when I heard it. A scream. It came from across the lake. At first, I thought it was some kind of animal, a fox maybe. But then it came again, longer, clearer, and without a doubt, human. It wasn't someone yelling for fun. It was raw and frantic, like someone being gutted alive. It echoed off the water in a way I'll never forget, sharp, shaky, and utterly terrifying. I froze, just sat there gripping my drink so tight I felt my knuckles lock up. I waited for the others to react, to come running out, but the house was dead quiet behind me, no footsteps. No doors opening, nothing. That's when I noticed something even worse. There was a figure on the water, not in a boat, not on a dock, standing. I blinked hard, leaned forward, and there it was, a pale shape, human-sized, motionless, standing in the middle of the damn lake like it was on glass. The water should have rippled, splashed, something, but it was totally still. I don't know how long I stared, a few seconds, a full minute, but as soon as I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, it was gone, vanished, no splash, no movement, just not there. I jumped up, ran back inside, and slammed the door shut so loud it woke everyone up. At first they thought I was messing with them, but I wasn't laughing. I was shaking, sweating. I told them what I saw, what I heard. Mark sobered up real fast. He didn't say much. Just got up, went to the closet, and pulled out a shotgun. Said he'd heard stories about squatters using the old shack, but the standing on water part, that didn't sit right with him either. We stayed up the rest of the night with the lights on. No one slept. At some point around 5 a.m., we heard a splash. Just one. Like someone stepping into water. That was it. We packed up and left that morning. Never stayed the second night. Never even talked about it again, actually. But that scream, that figure, it still shows up in my dreams sometimes. And even though I never saw its face, I always wake up feeling like it saw mine. My name is Ellie. I was 19 when this happened, and it's still one of the most disturbing things I've ever experienced. It happened during a late summer hiking trip in Tennessee, August. Hot and muggy, that time of year when the air feels like it's made of syrup and you can't tell if you're sweating or just absorbing the humidity. I had taken the trip with my boyfriend at the time, Jason. We'd been dating for a little over a year, and this was supposed to be our adventure week before school started up again. We both went to college in Florida, but he grew up in Knoxville and had spent most of his childhood hiking through the Smokies. He knew the trails better than anyone I'd ever met, which is the only reason I agreed to go camping at all. I'm not really the rough-it type. We picked a relatively popular trail that led to a remote overlook called Kings Point, not a technical hike, just long around 9 miles in total. We planned to hike in, camp near the top, and hike back out the next morning. Just one night. When we got to the trailhead, it was already late afternoon. We were behind schedule because we'd gotten stuck in some awful traffic leaving Knoxville. Jason wasn't worried, but I remember checking the time and thinking it would be dark long before we reached the campsite. There were only 2 cars in the gravel lot. One of them was a silver pickup, muddy and beat to hell, with the bed half full of broken branches and a tarp. The other was a small white sedan. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I do remember Jason saying something like, "Doesn't seem like anyone's out here." We grabbed our packs and started hiking. The first few miles were uneventful, quiet, peaceful, even. The trail followed a creek for a while and then slowly wound upward through thick forest. We didn't see a single other person, which I figured was a bonus. But just before the halfway point right where the incline started to pick up, I noticed something weird. Jason had stopped to tie his boot, and I was catching my breath when I saw it, a carved figure nailed to a tree about 15 feet off the ground. It looked like it had been handmade out of twigs and strips of cloth, like some kind of Blair Witch-looking thing. I pointed it out, and Jason kind of brushed it off. "Probably just someone messing around," he said. But not even 10 minutes later, we saw another. Different shape, but same idea. This one had tiny bones woven into it. And again, it was nailed to a tree high up, way above normal reach. That's when the weird feeling kicked in. The sort of gut-level discomfort you can't explain. Like the woods suddenly got too quiet. No birds, no bugs, just nothing. Jason started to look nervous too. He kept scanning the woods like he was expecting to see someone. We talked briefly about turning around, but we were over halfway by then, and it would have meant backtracking in low light. So we pushed on. Around 7:30, the sun dipped below the trees and the trail got darker fast. We were maybe a mile from the overlook when we heard movement up ahead. Something large off-trail, crashing through the brush. We both froze. "Probably a deer," Jason whispered. But I wasn't so sure. Whatever it was, it moved slowly. Deliberately. It wasn't the skittish gallop of a spooked animal. It sounded more like someone walking, heavy, dragging, then it stopped. Jason grabbed my wrist, and we just stood there in the middle of the trail, waiting. That's when we saw the man. He stepped out from behind a tree, maybe 30 feet up the path, just standing there, not moving, not saying a word. He wore what looked like an old yellow raincoat, filthy, stained, and ripped along the shoulder. His face was completely in shadow, but I could see his posture, rigid, still. Jason said, "Hey, man, you good?" The man didn't respond. We stood there, holding our breath, for what felt like an hour, but must have only been 20 seconds. Then the man slowly lifted his arm and pointed into the woods, away from the trail. not towards anything in particular. Just into the trees. Jason whispered to me, "Back up." "Right now?" We both started moving, slowly stepping backward. I couldn't take my eyes off the man. He never moved, not an inch. Not even to lower his arm. We turned a corner and started speed walking, almost running, until we were far enough away that we couldn't see him anymore. We didn't say a word for a long time. Just hiked, fast. Every snap of a twig made my heart stop. We didn't know if he'd followed us. We didn't even know what he wanted. We reached the overlook just as the last light disappeared. It wasn't even fully dark yet, but we didn't stop. Jason said, "Screw this. We're not staying here." Neither of us argued. We turned right back around and started heading back down. And that's when we heard it. A laugh. Not loud, not sudden, just low, quiet, like someone chuckling to themselves behind a tree. Jason shouted, "We're armed." Even though we weren't, there was silence after that. Just the wind and the sounds of us practically running down the trail. It took us hours to make it back to the trailhead in the dark. When we finally got to the gravel lot, there was only one car there. Not ours. Not the white sedan, the silver pickup. And its hood was still warm. I looked around and noticed something I hadn't seen before, hanging from the low branch of a tree. Right by the trailhead was another one of those twig figures, but this one had something tied around its neck. My hair tie. I hadn't even realized it was missing. We drove the entire way back to Knoxville in silence. We didn't report it. We didn't want to answer questions we didn't have answers for. I haven't hiked since, and I never will again, especially not at night. This happened in July of 2016, when I was working the night shift at a nursing home just outside of El Paso, Texas. I was 24 at the time, one of the youngest CNAs on staff, and I usually took the overnight shifts no one else wanted. The pay was better, and I didn't mind the quiet, at least not usually. The building I worked in wasn't your typical nursing home. It was old, not historic or charming, just outdated. Beige cinderblock walls, scuffed linoleum, flickering fluorescent lights in the halls. We called it the bunker, partly because of how the walls seemed to trap heat in the summer, and partly because, well, it just felt closed off from the world. There were only about a dozen residents in my wing, all elderly, most with dementia or limited mobility. My job was to do hourly rounds, check vitals, restock linens, and mostly just make sure no one had fallen out of bed or wandered. But during that summer, something started happening that I couldn't explain. It began with Mr. Alvarez. He was one of our quieter residents, late 80s, bedbound and mostly nonverbal except for occasional muttering in Spanish. One night, I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds when I passed by his room and saw him sitting up in bed. That immediately freaked me out because he physically couldn't sit up without assistance. When I stepped inside, he was staring at the wall blankly, like he wasn't even really awake. Then he turned his head slowly toward me and said, in perfect English, "She's outside the window." I froze. "Who?" I asked. But he just laid back down like nothing had happened. Eyes closed. Didn't say another word. That room didn't have a window. It was one of the interior rooms, the kind built into the middle of the facility. No outside-facing walls. Nothing but beige drywall and buzzing ceiling lights. I didn't sleep the next day. I just kept replaying his words over and over. "She's outside the window." I told a coworker about it the next night, Yasmin, one of the other night shift CNAs, and she looked kind of spooked. She said, "Are you messing with me?" Because Ms. Delaney said the same thing last week. Ms. Delaney had Alzheimer's. She was sweet, always humming to herself. Apparently, she'd told Jasmine in the middle of the night that a woman was tapping on the glass and trying to come in. Her room did have a window, but it faced the back parking lot. Chain link fence, security lights, no trees. Nothing that someone could hide behind. I started to pay more attention during rounds. I'd stop and just listen in the hallways. And on a few nights, I swear I heard something, a soft sound like fingernails on glass. Always far off, always faint. It became a pattern. Residents who couldn't walk started talking about a woman standing outside their window. Some said she had long black hair. Some said her face was pressed right up against the glass. One man, Mr. Dalton, said she was crying. Sighed, he could hear it even after he called for help. But whenever I went to check, the rooms were empty except for the residents. No signs of anyone outside. Then one night it escalated. I was in the supply closet restocking gloves when I heard the emergency call light go off. Room 208, Mr. Alvarez again. When I got there, the door was open. But the room was wrong. It looked exactly like it always did, same bed, same beige walls, but on the far side of the room, there was a window. I froze in the doorway. I know for a fact that room never had a window. I'd worked there for almost a year. It was an inside room. There shouldn't have been any window. And yet there it was. Tall, narrow, just above bed height. And standing outside, face barely visible through the glass, was a woman, pale skin, black hair, eyes wide open and completely still, not blinking. Just staring into the room. Into me. I couldn't move, my hands were shaking. I didn't even realize I was backing out into the hallway until I bumped into a cart and knocked over a tub of folded towels. The crash snapped me out of it. I ran back into the room, heart pounding. And the window was gone. Just blank drywall. Mr. Alvarez hadn't moved, eyes shut, breathing slow. But on his nightstand was something that hadn't been there before, a single black strand of hair, long and perfectly straight. I quit 2 days later. Didn't even finish the week. I told my supervisor I had family stuff going on and never went back. I didn't want to explain what I saw. I didn't want to be told I imagined it. I know what I saw. I haven't worked a night shift since. And sometimes if I'm walking past a building with old windows, I catch myself looking just for a second to see if she's there. Sometimes I think, she's waiting for me to look too long.